Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Charrington, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the National Institute for Deterrent Studies, otherwise known as NIDS, for tuning in to today's Huessy Seminar, where the most important interaction is with you. In case you're new to us, NIDS is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides deterrence education by hosting live and virtual events, podcasts, publications on global security, as well as workshops and courses through our NIDS Academy, all in the interest of advancing peace and promoting stability through a strong national security and nuclear deterrent. You can see more of what we have to offer and get involved at thinkdeterrence.com. Please help us grow our membership and audiences by following us on LinkedIn, X, Rumble, and YouTube, as well as wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Don't miss our next live event at the Capitol Hill Club in Washington, D.C. It's more important today than ever. Dr. Uzi Rubin on June 27th, addressing the growing concerns of missile threats in the Middle East. Dr. Rubin is the founder and first director of the Israel Missile Defense Organization and the Israel Ministry of Defense, in which he initiated and managed Israel's nationwide effort to develop, produce, and deploy its first national missile defense shield, the Arrow Missile Defense System. Please join us if you're in DC for that event. Our next virtual Huessy seminar will be held on July 11th with Rose Gottenmoeller, former NATO Deputy Secretary General, who speaks on arms control and navigating nuclear diplomacy. On July 18th, we have Matt Kronig, Senior Director of Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. That invitation will be coming out soon. July 25th, we have Greg Weaver, Strategic Imperatives, Augmenting Theater Nuclear Forces for the 21st Century. On August 1st, we have the Honorable Frank Miller, who will join us again for a discussion on why simply renewing the U.S.-Russian arms control framework is no longer sufficient in today's multipolar nuclear environment. As the world marks the 80th anniversary of atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, national security experts, military leaders, and scholars will gather at the Harry S. Truman Library on August 6th for a one-day conference addressing the evolving role of nuclear weapons in global security. This timely event, hosted by the Harry S. Truman Library and NIDS, will explore conversations about nuclear deterrence and its role in preventing great power conflict. We hope that you can join us for this event called Peace Through Strength 80 Years Later. You can look for this event and all of our events at our website at thinkdeterrence.com. You can register there as well, and feel free to email me if you would like to get any of your colleagues on the guest list for any future events. During today's presentation, we encourage you to write your questions in the chat box at any time. We will begin the Q&A session after our speaker. And during this, if you see a question that you think is very important that you want to address, please give it a thumbs up so we can give it priority. I want to introduce our host for today's seminar, Mr. Peter Huessy himself, President and Senior Director of Strategic Deterrent Studies at Geostrategic Analysis and Senior Fellow here at NIDS. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Kimberly. We are honored today to have General Chun, who is served in the South Korean military from 1981 to 2016, I believe. Korea has a very special place in my heart. I spent 2 years there at Yonsei University in Seoul as an undergraduate student. And it's interesting, one of the things that General Chun is famous for is that he rescued one of his commanding officers who was a victim of a bombing in Rangoon, Burma, by the North Koreans, in which my Korean host, teacher, mentor, dear friend, Ham Byung-chun, ambassador to the United States, ambassador to the United Nations, national security advisor to the president of the country of Korea, was also killed. And so I have a very strong attachment to the Republic of Korea, and I'm honored to have General Chun come in to talk to us. Let me preface my remarks by pointing out that the issue of whether or not South Korea should at some point secure nuclear weapons, apart from having nuclear weapons on the peninsula that are owned by the United States, is in 1982, according to Tom Reed, who was President Reagan's deputy national security advisor. In 1982, Deng Xiaoping, in a secret meeting of the Chinese Politburo, decided to export nuclear weapons technology to Pakistan and also to North Korea, Iran, Libya, and I think also it bled over into Iraq. But this was a deliberate attempt to proliferate nuclear weapons technology as a means of putting pressure on the United States. We're living, isn't it interesting, if you look at all those areas, Libya, the North Korea, Pakistan, and Iran, we're dealing with the end result now, after 40 some odd years, of China's deliberate attempt to spread nuclear weapons to the bad guys. General Chun is going to talk to us today about what's going on the Korean Peninsula, what the options they have with respect to dealing with the North Korean threat. General, on behalf of NIDS and my president who's joining us here today, Jim Petrovsky, and I want to thank Kimberly for all her great organizational work. General, it's an honor to have you here, and it's over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, NIDS, for this opportunity to introduce the Korean perspective of how we see South Korean nuclear weapons. First, I think it's important to understand why South Koreans want nuclear weapons. Now, depending on how you word a survey, it comes out very differently. But I think it's probably safe to say that most polls conducted towards South Koreans about an indigenous nuclear capability comes out to about 7 out of 10 people in South Korea want their own nuclear weapon. This is quite comparative to about 15 to 20% in Japan. So the Koreans have this desire for nuclear weapons. So the first thing that I would like to mention is, why is that? Why do Koreans want their nuclear weapons? Maybe it's an obvious question that, but I still think it's something that we should look into. For me, I try to understand my own people first. And the more I do, I find that it's not easy. So when I try to answer this very simple question, why do South Koreans want nuclear weapons? Well, it depends on which South Korean you're talking to. So let's just assume that 30% of the South Korean population is conservative, 30% is progressive, and 40% are moderates who are caught in the middle. Of course, the conservatives want their own nuclear capability because they base security on strength. And since North Korea has a nuclear capability, it is to the conservatives just natural in their psychology and thinking that they would want a comparable capability. For now, all the Koreans know that we have the United States that provide us that deterrence. But still, because of the uncertainties of the world, there's that margin of doubt that requires some sort of effort on our part to try to fill that gap. The progressives are the the ones that are probably most against having nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. One of the themes that they say is, we're trying to denuclearize North Korea. If we go nuclear, we just lost our justification in trying to denuclearize North Korea. Well, that's a statement or a line of thinking from a person who thinks North Korea will ever ever give up their nuclear weapons. I, for one, don't think North Korea will ever give up their nuclear weapons. So that logic, although it sounds very good, it doesn't really seem to be practical in my mind. The progressives also cite many of the reasons that South Korea having nuclear weapons would bring repercussions and strains to the ROK-US alliance, as well as the IAEA, the NPT, and so forth. So the progressives cite those things, the economic fallback that we would have, and when we say 30% of the Korean population would not support a indigenous program, that's probably the progressives saying that. The progressives are generally not very pro-US, and they are, in general, I think, nationalistic. They pride themselves in being Korean, but at the same time, they have these wishful thinking towards the North Koreans. Peter mentioned that the North Koreans attempted to kill my delegation in 1983. In 1983, I was only 24 years old. There was a lot of, education about how bad the North Koreans were, but South Koreans always thought that it was an exaggeration. But after what I saw on that day, I thought to myself, okay, we need to find a way to live peacefully with North Korea, but I better keep my gunpowder dry. Unfortunately, when long years of peace continue, having that consistent mindset of preparedness is not easy. So the progressives and the conservatives and the moderates, I think as a whole, are scared of uncertainty, scared of abandonment. But our fear is not only towards North Korea. It's just that North Korean nuclear weapons has sparked generational fears, which is China. So if you ask Koreans why they want nuclear weapons, it's not that we don't trust the United States. It's not even North Korean nuclear weapons. It usually comes out as we're concerned about China, and with nuclear weapons, we will never have to be afraid of the Chinese. That's what comes out as number one reason. North Korean nuclear weapons comes out as maybe number 2 or 3. And at number 2 or 3 is, uncertainties in international relations. During the Biden administration, the Nuclear Consultative Group, the NCG, provided a new type of security assurances for the Republic of Korea, which is envied by many nations. So far, it's pretty good, but we have not seen what the Trump administration is going to do next. So again, it sparks fears and uncertainty. This leads to another issue that we face compared to our adversaries. our adversaries, especially like North Korea and China and Russia, their leadership can sustain themselves for many decades, while our political systems are either, in Korea's case, 5 years, and the United States, 4 to 8 years. Basically, the enemy can wait us out, and they know that. The enemy also looks at us and said, in their eyes, we lack the resolve, and compared to their society, they don't have to worry about public opinion, and so they can just wait us out. So this is a systematic advantage that they have, and a systematic challenge that we have. Today I was asked, what kind of implications would South Korean nuclear weapons have? Obviously, it would be a nuclear proliferation, a nuclear arms race. In my experience in many seminars and conferences and tabletops, if South Korea were to have nuclear weapons, the Japanese would want their own nuclear weapons, which actually, if you think about it, doesn't make sense. Only 15 to 20% of their population want nuclear weapons. And if South Korea were to have nuclear weapons, the Chinese and the North Koreans would have a hard time with that situation alone. Why would the Japanese want nuclear weapons? And it's surely not for practical reasons. It's more or less emotional. If the Koreans have it, the Japanese must have it. I think Taiwan would also be very, very interested in having their own nuclear system. If the South Koreans were to go nuclear, we would not be going nuclear as did the North Koreans by lying and cheating. We would only pursue an indigenous nuclear capability through the mechanism that already exists. We would go to the NPT and present our case. We would confer with the United States and try to persuade the United States to see where we are. In any case, if South Korea had nuclear weapons, who would be which nation amongst all the Northeast Asian or Indo-Pacific nations that would be on the losing end? To me, it's obvious, it's the Chinese. And if the Chinese and the North Koreans don't like it, if our enemies don't like it, the logic is that it's good for us. So I think South Korea having its own nuclear weapons has advantages, but we need to think of it in a different light. For instance, South Korean nuclear weapons, to me, would be an extension of US nuclear capability. My understanding is that the United States lacks nuclear capability already, that it should welcome allies that are true to the concepts of freedom and democracy, shared values, to have a deterrent that would really put pressure on its main adversary, which in this case would be the Chinese. For us, I think even if South Korea were to have its own indigenous nuclear capability, the United States would still be important, because nuclear weapons is not a weapon to be used lightly. It's just a deterrent. All the other things, which is 99% of the other security tasks that must be conducted, has to be done with allies. And for the Republic of Korea, the United States is ever important. Even if we had 1,000 nuclear warheads, we would still need the United States. So the second point to me is, not only would South Korean nuclear weapons be an extension of US capability, but it would actually, the United States would still be the most important country for South Korea. Finally, the North Koreans are every day improving their conventional and nuclear capability. There needs to be some stage where we need to find a balance to negotiate with North Korea. North Korea will not negotiate when South Korea does not have nuclear weapons. So some people find it absurd, but to de-escalate, sometimes escalation is a requirement. Another point is, and I've said this before, US adversaries, they've always miscalculated American resolve. They've always seen the United States as weak, that Americans are selfish, they enjoy life too much. And the moral pedestal that the United States has placed itself at the price of its own soldiers to our enemy, it's a weakness. That's why they hide their critical assets in hospitals and schools, because they know that we will not, we'll do everything that we can to limit collateral damage. To them, it's just a weakness that we have. But I think our adversaries would say that Koreans, South Koreans, although we've gone soft, we're not like Americans. They would not be as certain about the level of cruelty that the South Koreans might go through. The days of Vietnam are gone, but still, memories do last. So I think that's another element to think about. Before I finish, even as a South Korean, sharing my thoughts with you about South Korean indigenous weapons, I really don't have a warm and fuzzy about South Koreans having nuclear weapons. Actually, it scares me because I know a lot of these generals, and to think that they would have, their fingers on a red button doesn't make me feel good. I would rather have American assistance, which means if the United States helps us in becoming a nuclear capable nation, it's actually control and safety. You can ensure that our weapons are safer and that cooperation is built into the use of such a capability, which would make me feel a lot better. Sometimes when I think of this, I wonder what the North Koreans are doing, and it really scares me that the North Koreans might actually have an accident. I mean, who is making sure that their nuclear arsenal is protected from an accident or a mislaunch? So let me just stop there, and we'll see what questions might arise. Thank you.
Thank you, General, very much for that. I'm going to pass on a question that my president asked here. I'll read it to you. If the Republic of Korea gets a nuclear deterrent, do you think that they may follow the U.S. with treaties and extended deterrence? And if so, who would be ROK's the partners with the Republic of Korea in that case?
Obviously, it would be the United States. So the United States is the glue that would integrate any kind of apparatus in Northeast Asia, in my view. Because quite frankly, the United States is the only nation that everybody trusts for whatever reason. And I think that if South Korea were to go nuclear, and right now the South Koreans are not advocating for nuclear weapons yet. What they're advocating for is nuclear capability, nuclear latency, so that if an unforeseen situation, what we dread most is a US withdrawal, a nullification of the ROK US alliance. I know it sounds absurd, but sometimes the messaging coming from Washington, D.C. really is scary. It's scarier than what comes out of Beijing. So, in that kind of situation, we want to make sure by the time Americans pack up and leave, we will at least have a nuclear capability. And I have found that many Americans say that, oh, if the United States were to abandon Korea, then the previous calculations or stance that they would be adamantly against South Korea having nuclear weapons, not because of just South Korea, but because of the arms race that it would cause, significantly goes down. So again, to your question, the United States would be our glue. And I think that the US provides us that kind of trust.
The second question, if the South Koreans have a latent nuclear capability or even acquire nuclear weapons, what happens with respect to Japan?
As I said, Japan would probably want to have their own nuclear weapons. I think the progressives are generally very anti-Japanese. They have a long memory. That is not to say that the conservatives are anti-Japanese, but I think the majority of the Korean people don't like what happened to us in the past, but they would rather look to the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there are good Japanese, there are bad Japanese, like everybody else. But I personally don't care if Japan has nuclear weapons, because what is Japan going to do? Launch a missile to Seoul, maybe Pyongyang, but only after Pyongyang launched a missile to Tokyo.
Right. Yeah.
And with this, again, if South Korea and Japan had nuclear weapons, who could we really trust, to keep us sane? It's probably the Americans.
Yeah.
So no matter what kind of nuclear capabilities that South Korea or Japan or any other Northeast Asian country has, I think the role of the United States will change, but not the importance of the United States.
Interesting. Another question came up, General, is if the United States deployed the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile in a nuclear variant in the Western Pacific, or, for example, put a capability on F-35, had a gravity bomb or cruise missile or some kind of extended range missile on our airplanes in that area, would that probably delay any South Korean move towards nuclear capability, or would it basically be enough to assuage the concerns of the Korean people that America is going to stick around?
So there's a good number, I can't give you a percentage, who want American nuclear weapons back on the Korean Peninsula. Mostly these are the conservatives. But I, for one, am not one of them. Because why would I want nuclear weapons on Korean soil, making it an obvious target, when, as you just said, a U.S. submarine could be somewhere, with a heavy punch. And F-35s. Why would I want a nuclear capable F-35 on Korean soil when if it's in Guam, it's fine. So I don't see the value in that. Now, I would see value if you had a Pershing type missile with hypersonic capability. But then again, it's like having two cocked pistols, you know, aimed at the other person's head, and he ended up having the same kind of capability because Korea is a small peninsula.
True.
If the North Koreans ever launched, when the alarm bell goes off, the guy who's on duty, he's going to have to push the button. He won't even have time to make a call. So having this type of situation is exactly why the INF treaty came about 40 years ago. So I don't see that as a solution either. Right now, the NCG has done a pretty good job. The only thing that the NCG has been not good at is educating the Korean population. For whatever reason, all the things that the NCG has achieved has not been shared appropriately with the public, in my view. And so, despite a lot of progress by the US government, I don't think the general public feels comfortable about this. So, I think having nuclear weapons back on Korean soil, although it is attractive to some Koreans, once they know the dangers and the benefits and the cost, they will probably say, "Yep, it's better to have it on a U.S. submarine off the coast of the sea, or in Hawaii or Guam. It's just a matter of a couple of hours." Having said that, what would assure Korea more, in my view, is short and strong statements such as the Biden administration, end of the regime. That kind of language is what North Korea understands. That kind of language is what, thugs understand. And I think the next U.S. Nuclear capable missile, maybe the B-84, name should be end of the regime. And we need to have more stronger resolve because I think that's where our adversaries think that we are not capable of doing that.
Okay, my next question is, it may seem obvious, but I don't think people have thought through, what is it that North Korea seeks to gain by having this nuclear capability? Because as you know, prior to 2004 or 5, they were enriching uranium, but they didn't yet have a bomb, which exploded, I think, in 2006, I believe. But what do they seek to gain from having this nuclear capability?
I think the North
I don't mean
Koreans,
rhetorically what they say, but what is, in your view, the real reason behind what they're doing?
I think the North Koreans are genuinely afraid of a regime change attempt by the United States and South Korea. Now, some American senior policymakers have stated that regime change should be a stated policy for the United States. I'm sure that was not lost by the North Koreans. Secondly, North Korean leadership, they know their deficiencies better than anyone else. Can you imagine what Kim Jong-un must feel? Is there any person around him that he can trust? He probably can't even trust his own wife. So he's got a group of people who shares the same interests, and then he uses terror to maintain himself. But because of the deficiencies of his system, he's not only scared of us, but he's scared of his own people. So he needed a device, a mechanism to protect his power. And I think that's the second reason why he would want a nuclear weapon. Now, once they have this nuclear capability, they've not only improved the bomb itself and the missile delivery system, but the policies of initially they said it was going to be no first use, but they seem to have put it in their constitution that they are a nuclear state, which implies that they will never give it up. They've also have policy statements saying that although it will not be a first strike capability, that it can be used at any time. They have delegated some of the launch authority because they're concerned that a first strike preemptive attack by the South or the United States could take out the leadership. In that case, local commanders have the authority to launch nuclear weapons and so forth. So they're modifying their operational mode day by day. So in my view, the North Koreans genuinely feel threatened from abroad and within, number one. Number two, with this nuclear capability, they want to make sure that their regime survival is not threatened.
My next question is, given the origin of North Korea's nuclear program in having to do with China, what does China seek to gain by acquiescing in and supporting a North Korean nuclear program, or are they having second thoughts?
So it seems China thought that it's better to have a nuclear armed North Korea than to have North Korea collapse and a free and democratic Republic of Korea coming to its borders with a strong American ally. So I think the many years that we wasted thinking during the six-party talks that the Chinese were really going to pressure North Korea into not going nuclear was nonsense. They could have starved the North Koreans, but they did not do that, and now we're stuck with this situation. So again, when I think of these things, I say to myself, the Chinese brought it upon themselves that South Korea would want nuclear weapons. And some of my Chinese specialists, experts, tell me that if South Korea were to go nuclear, the Chinese would be unhappy, but they would accept it. So I think the Chinese felt that they are that much concerned about having the United States at their borders that it would be better to have North Korea, a nuclear armed North Korea next to them. But I think that was a big mistake. When I think of this, it also brings me into mind at some stage when we can negotiate and have some sort of arrangement with North Korea, and when North Korean nuclear missiles are not heading for Washington or Seoul, those missiles might actually be pointing towards Beijing. And that kind of situation would be pretty good for us. So I think all of that is something to think about. South Koreans like myself would only agree to a agreement with North Korea if we had nuclear weapons or some firm commitment by the United States that it would provide a deterrent that we would not need to question.
I have another question here from John Swagel. Now, let me read it to you, sir. Is there reason to believe the current 123 agreement between the United States and the Republic of Korea, underpinning crucial nuclear cooperation, survives a Republic of Korea nuclear armament?
Yeah, this is a great question. So if you put it that way, I don't think it would survive. But again, I said we would not be pursuing nuclear weapons like the North Koreans did. Actually, what's in the short term, what's more pressing for us is the 123 agreement. Right now, our spent fuel, we just can't store it anymore because we don't have the space.
Mhm.
So we need to reprocess some of this fuel just because of economic reasons. Now, when we do this, all of us know that this reprocessing might entail weapons development. And so we need a new 123 agreement that allows South Korea to have an economic survivable, solution to our nuclear energy problem that we have. Spent fuel storage being the top issue. So this is a separate, more critical short-term issue that we need to talk about, and it's really being hampered because I think the United States suspect, and rightfully so, okay, that South Korea wants to do this to increase its capability to have nuclear weapons. I would just say to you guys, accept it. We're at a stage where new kind of thinking is required.
Mhm.
So I would just say, look at the advantages and not just the cost. And again, South Korean nuclear weapons would be an extension of U.S. capabilities. And by helping us, it would actually ensure safety and a measure of control. And I would personally feel a lot better if you guys were involved.
And what I hear you also saying is that if the United States took a nuclear capability at the theater level and had it in the region, it would not only protect South Korea, but also Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan, so that it would be not considered just a South Korean benefit. It would be regional and overall deterrence. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course. Definitely that would be it. But the thing is, I think the Chinese and the North Koreans, maybe not the North Koreans, but the Chinese think that the United States is so against using nuclear weapons that even if you had nuclear weapons in the region, that the Americans would actually not use it. And if memory serves me right, when the Ukrainian war broke out, you stated, instead of saying end of 3G, you actually said we're not going to use nuclear weapons. And it turned out that Putin used it against us. So I think that's a lesson that we need to learn. Thugs only respect strength.
No, I've written recently a couple of essays on if you take your nuclear deterrent off the table, it's awfully difficult to put it back. And we did that in 2014 by saying Ukraine has no interest. And then in 2022, or actually December 21, we vocally talked about fearing escalation. And that gave, in my view, a signal to Putin that his nuclear threats were capable of keeping us somewhat restrained in what we helped Ukraine with, which just puts us in the current dilemma we're in. Another question came out here, and I wonder if it's related. What is North Korea getting in return for sending troops to Ukraine and also missiles?
Everything. Food, fuel, money, technology. What's most frightening for me is experience.
Right.
Now, 2 years ago, I was in DC with a room full of experts, a lot of them Russian experts. They said, uh, their learned opinion was that this was going to be short-lived, that once the war is over, the North Koreans will be thrown out like a concubine or something. And I said, I'm not too sure. And they asked me, why don't you think that? And I told them, did you see Putin open the door for Kim Jong-un when he was trying to get in the car? Did you see Putin wait for Kim Jong-un at a meeting? It's usually the other way around.
Yeah,
Putin makes
exactly.
other people wait an hour or so, but it wasn't like that. What do we see now? We know that the North Koreans have provided nearly more than half of all the ammunition that the Russians are using, made in North Korea. They're refurbishing a new bridge with between North Korea and the Russians. Why would they do that unless they're planning on doing a lot of business? Even if the war is over, there's going to be a lot of student visas for North Koreans. And these students will not be studying in Moscow University. They're actually going to be workers fixing and rebuilding, newly occupied former Ukrainian and now Russian territory. So this relationship is going to last for a long time. And so, all the sanctions that we had is kaput. And I'm sure China is a bit, uncomfortable with all of this. But this whole war in Europe has benefited the Chinese the most. And I think the North Koreans, especially Kim Jong-un, he's either the second runner-up who's gained from this. And it's very, very disturbing for me as a security analyst sitting here in Seoul.
Would you expand on what the Chinese reaction has been to this cooperative effort between North Korea and Russia? Because you alluded to it in your answer, but I'd like you to expand what the concerns, both pro and con, are, because it's a very intriguing line of thinking about. You would think China would be in support of it because they're both allies, but you also seem to hint that could be some problems here. So could you expand on that, please?
So number one, North Korea has always been very good at milking the Chinese and Russian tit.
Oh, okay.
But once the Soviet Union collapsed, when one tit dried up, they were only afforded one source. And then that one source started becoming picky and controlling. And I think Kim Jong-un didn't like that. So he endured a lot of suffering until he got his nuclear device to work. Right now, the Chinese are saying, we don't care. Well, if they didn't care, why are they saying that so many times? Although they benefited from the Ukrainian-Russian war, they're the biggest winner. They got cheap, Russian fuel.
Mm-hmm.
They're sending a lot of stuff to Russia to maintain Russian war machine. So the Chinese have benefited from this. But at the same time, the relationship with the Russians and the North Koreans, I think they've lost a measure of influence. For many years, we Koreans and the United States thought that the North Koreans and the Chinese relationship was something like the Korean, South Korean and US relationship, an ally, far from the truth. It seems North Korean attitude is during the Great War of Revolution, which is Mao Zedong fighting Chiang Kai-shek and all that, North Korean communists fought on the side of Mao. And so the war in Korea, where China sent hundreds of thousands of their troops, was just a payback. So it's a more of a transactional relationship. And in the 90s, when we think 1 million North Koreans starved to death, a lot of the North Koreans suffered. They were not blaming Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-il. They were actually blaming the Chinese, that the Chinese did not help enough, that they were betrayed. So it's not just the South Koreans who don't like the Chinese. It's actually the North Koreans don't like the Chinese. It's another aspect to think about because it provides us with an opportunity to put a wedge between North Korean and Chinese relations. I just want to say that for thousands of years, the Chinese know that it is bad luck to fight with the Koreans, especially the North Koreans. So this is something that I feel that is a dynamic with which there are many opportunities in Northeast Asia, especially when the United States is concentrating on, China. We can see the initial firefight that China and the U.S. might fight, but how do we finish it? Maybe this area is an answer.
Let me ask you another question that is always intrigued me, and that is, there are those on the left and the right who are calling for the U.S. to withdraw our forces from South Korea. The most prominent are Ted Galen Carpenter and Doug Bandow, who are with the affiliated with the Quincy Institute. Would you run through for us what would be the consequences of U.S. military forces leaving the Republic of Korea?
I'm not a fortune teller, so I will just rely on history. In 1949, for whatever reason, the United States decided to withdraw from the Korean Peninsula. The Koreans begged the United States not to leave. Schoolgirls went on the streets to plead that U.S. soldiers stay a little bit longer. The United States said, "Don't worry, nothing will happen." The Koreans then said, "Well, if you do have to leave, can you leave us some weapons?" And the United States said, "What kind of weapons do you want?" The Koreans said, "How about some tanks?" And they said, "Kim, look at your terrain, rice paddies and mountains. This is not tank country." The South Koreans did not have a single tank, while the North Koreans had 242 T-34/85s. Every South Korean officer remembers this because we had to stop those tanks by sending in suicide squads. That's how we stopped them. So if history has taught us anything, that mistake not only cost 10% of the Korean people, but 37,000 Americans lost their lives.
Yeah.
If the United States were to withdraw, I believe that the North Koreans, because they've been taught for the past 8 decades that the South needs to be liberated from those foxy Americans. That's what they call you guys, foxy Americans. And that foxy is not what we think. It's not the fox that you think. It looks more like a wolf. But every 3 to 5-year-old kid in North Korea knows this foxy 승냥이 같은 미국 놈. That's what they call it. It's like a wolf. That's what they refer to Americans as. They would have to the temptation would be too great. And what scares me most is, think about Kim Jong-un. He is now 40 years old, all his life. When he was sitting on grandpa's lap, he heard that North Korea is the greatest paradise in the world. That all the things that they've achieved is because of the Kim family. The only thing that hampers their happiness is these foxy Americans. Maybe Kim Jong-un really believes it in his heart that it is his mission to liberate us South Koreans. If there's another war on the Korean Peninsula, and if the United States does nothing, then it will truly be Japan. And if you lose Japan, then the United States loses the whole of the Pacific.
Yeah.
And that is not the kind of United States that if I were an American, that I would want to pass down to my grandchildren, because our grandfathers did not sacrifice for us to not pick up the baton.
Understood. I'm going to turn it over to our president, Jim Petrovsky. James, thank you for joining us, and the last words are yours, sir.
Thank you very much, General, and Peter, and all our guests that are here listening in. I can't say enough for the attention that needs to be paid to this important issue and the role of nuclear weapons in preserving peace, and how we have to look at all these very complex issues. And so I think this is a great topic. I think it's one that needs to continue to be looked at. You look at today in the news, the emphasis on, of course, what's going on in the Middle East and the influence of nuclear weapons there, and how that affects our policy, our peace, and of course, our prosperity as a country. I think that we can see the questions especially show that there's a great interest in this issue. And I'm glad it's coming to the forefront, because I think we put it in the back for too long. So your comments, General Chun, have been extremely valuable in evaluating this issue. I do want to highlight, Kimberly mentioned earlier that we were going to have a recognition of the 80th year since the bombings that occurred, and a decision that was made to drop those bombs at the Truman Center in Kansas. And we've extended and received a warm agreement with General Chun to speak at that event. And so we are delighted to have him come there. If you can make it there, I think that's going to be a great event where you can see him live in person. So I understand, I haven't seen you in person, but I understand you have looked better in person than you do on the video here. So I'll just pass that along. And so we look forward to that. And we look forward to all the answering any of these additional questions that are here that we didn't get to. And so I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Operations, Kimberly Charrington, to close out this session. But once again, thank you so much for your wise words. And we will be contemplating on this. And for all of our guests and all of the supporters of NIS, I thank you for all that you do for us. So back to you, Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks on behalf of the National Institute for Deterrent Studies for being here today. And thank you to General Chun for sharing your time and expertise with our audience. And of course, thank you to Peter for bringing this important content to our attention every single week, every single day, for all you do to fulfill our mission here at NIDS, which is to advance peace, promote stability, and shape policy through applied research, education, and consulting. You can look for everything we do on at thinkdeterrence.com, subscribe to Global Security Review, and engage with us on social media. We know that together we can advance peace, stability, by evaluating these deterrence practices and policies and affirm that a credible nuclear deterrent is the bedrock for American nuclear security. We thank you and hope you have a peaceful day.
Thank you, General Chun. Honored.
Thank you.
And thank you, Kimberly. And thank to all our sponsors and supporters and attendees. And we will see you again at our next meeting. Thanks very much.